2020 has thrown quite a bit at us, but 2019 was pretty action-packed too. We had the failed Area 51 raids, a Women's World Cup win, and Lori Loughlin's daughter almost rode for USC. But national outrage arose over one key event last year. Tweets were posted, hands were thrown over this controversial matter. In May of 2019, the beloved kids show Arthur aired an episode titled Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone, in which Arthur's teacher, Mr. Ratburn, had a gay marriage. All seemed well. The rat and his aardvark life partner walked down the aisle, but not in Alabama. Alabama Public Television refused to air the episode, reasoning that kids are too young for that type of exposure. Now let's get things straight. Or in Mr. Ratburn's case, not so straight. Alabama Public Television intended to protect kids, but frankly, they overprotected. And unfortunately, we suffer from a much larger issue of overprotection today. We are afflicted by what Ryan Shea of the Berkeley Political Review calls a growing overprotectiveness towards American children. When a fear of kids getting too political trumps the importance of youth civic engagement, and letting kids be kids means excusing them from necessary discussions, it's clear we aren't doing enough to keep kids informed and involved. And when a lack of education leaves us vulnerable to the darkness, the hate, the realities of today's world, adults and kids, we can do better for the younger generation. So today, let's examine the problems. First, how children are overprotected, and second, how it affects their perspective. Then, we'll find a solution to let kids see the world for what it is. Because in order to connect ourselves to world issues and create a better future for us, overprotection needs to be just that. Over. Frankly, we have an overprotection misconception. Now, I know that sounds about as complicated as, I don't know, my mom trying to navigate the new iOS 14 update, but I promise it's simple. The adults in children's lives want the best for them. Carrying the hefty responsibility of raising and teaching us, they inherently want to keep us safe. But that's where, inevitably, overprotection comes into play. Let's look at the facts on how climate change is introduced to children. In 2019, NPR polled parents and teachers on how they discuss climate change with kids. An overwhelming 68% of parents agreed that, yes, climate change should be discussed with kids. Yet under half of them had even discussed it with their own children at home. As for teachers, 74% believe that climate change should be taught in school, but only 42% actually teach it. Now, I don't expect my math or Spanish teachers to be telling me about climate change, but when a common excuse for not teaching it is kids are too young, you start to believe they either don't think kids are capable enough or don't think the issues are worth caring about. And this is far from an isolated issue. Let's look at race. We've heard parents say time and time again that they don't want to explain race to their kindergartner because it encourages them to notice racial differences and therefore treat classmates of other races differently, which makes sense to a certain extent. But when a study from the American Psychological Association tells us that starting at 6 months, infants show racial bias towards their own race and against other races, and 3-year-olds associate some racial groups with negative traits, it's clear that kids aren't colorblind. They pick up on race whether you choose to have the conversation or not. Now, it's natural for young children to develop racial bias. In fact, it's inevitable. When we're little, we spend the most time around our family, people who look like us, so we're raised to be most comfortable around people who are like us. But that can't be where it ends. Skidmore College psychology professor Lee Wilton explains that even if it's a difficult topic, it's important to talk with children about race because it can be difficult to undo racial bias once it takes root. Without that conversation about race, that's when innocent bias turns into lifelong prejudice. So how does overprotection play out as we grow older? Well, there's two sides to the story, the perpetrator and the victim. In March of 2019, the California Board of Education proposed a new comprehensive sex education curriculum, which included LGBTQ issues. The response came from an organization called Informed Parents of California. Over 200 parents protesting in front of the state capitol. The parents chanted the phrase, "Too much, too soon." You know what I think is really too much, too soon? The fact that 87% of LGBTQ youth report being bullied in school. When adults declare certain issues and identities inappropriate, they send a message to their children that those who are different from them are people to be protected from, rather than understood. And that's when kids bully people they were taught to view as bad. They learn intolerance and hate before they learn PEMDAS or the periodic table. The bully becomes the perpetrator, spouting hate and inspiring it in others. And the kid who is bullied becomes the victim, forced to tolerate the hate and remember it as they grow older, because that's just what kids do. We have the ability to change this. Let's look at it from a new perspective. It's not what kids do. It's what we allow them to do. And I think we can all agree that none of us want to see our classmates, our students, our children become victims. And maybe that's why many kids will never hear about sexual assault until a friend, relative, or even they experience it. While painting a picture of this perfect world where sexual assault doesn't exist is certainly ideal, it's not realistic because it cleverly ignores the fact that according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. Pretending those experiences don't exist is not only an injustice to survivors, it's a disservice to future victims. Sexual assault is not easy to talk about. It's hard, but it's even harder to not talk about it with your child and watch them become a victim instead. We have the resources and knowledge necessary to change this. We just need to use education as a tool for prevention. And while I don't have proof that by doing this, sexual assault will magically disappear with the snap of a finger, I do have proof of progress. A sexual education and prevention program for students called WISE was implemented at Ray Elementary School in New Hampshire. By engaging in age-appropriate, interactive lessons, the kids learned which of their body parts were public and private. And through giving and receiving hugs, they learned how to ask for consent and respond to someone who says no. The Ray School's principal, Matt Laramie, says, "When you see the cycle broken this early, it's joyful. This is how things are supposed to be." My hope is that if we can implement similar programs in more schools across the country, overprotection will be a thing of the past, and the cycle will be broken in every child's future. My absolute greatest passion in life is speech and debate. To me, it's always been this unique opportunity to use my words for good. Above all, it is the best community I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. Every weekend, I'm surrounded by high schoolers informing themselves and each other, listening to other perspectives, and just preparing to take on this crazy world. Now, my dad is one of the greatest influences in my life. My freshman year, I remember I brought him the judge at his first speech and debate tournament, and after he judged, I asked him what he thought. And his answer was so simple, yet something that stuck with me to this day. He said, "You know, other kids your age are eating Tide Pods for fun, but you guys are the ones who give me hope in your generation." It inspires me every day that kids my age are willing to acknowledge the uncomfortable, face the formidable, and tackle the seemingly impossible, all because they care. We are living proof that when we overcome overprotection, we are motivated and prepared to take on our most pressing issues, all on our own. And so the question becomes, how can we protect kids without overprotecting? As for the solution, you may be surprised by where it comes from. As a TV show, Arthur has been proven to contain multiple episodes with a moral lesson, or a lesson that teaches the importance of taking the perspective of others. Researchers at UC Davis and Wake Forest University even found that children who watched just one episode of Arthur with a moral lesson measured higher levels of empathy and open-mindedness, traits we can all use in battling overprotection. So, I think we could all learn a little something from Arthur. Little kids are the DWs of the world. They're constantly growing and learning about the world around them, but they depend on people who are older than them to guide them along the way. Now, for discussions with young children, gun violence and politics are certainly not the topics to talk about. The key is feeding them information that makes them more caring about the world around them and the people in it. By doing so, we can raise a younger generation with less overprotection and more understanding and compassion than I think we've ever seen before. Teenagers, you're Arthur. Although life can sometimes feel a whole lot like the Arthur fist meme, it's our job to be both the teachers and the learners. Spark those crucial conversations with your younger siblings and kids you may be tutoring or babysitting. Give them the knowledge you wish you had when you were their age. Most importantly, as a teenager, you can now do your own research, have mature conversations, and make a real impact in your community. Even if you grew up overprotected, you now have the power to break down those barriers and open yourself up to learning what you were never taught. Parents, you're Jane and David Reed. Especially in the early stages of your child's life, you have the greatest influence over what they know and what they don't. It is absolutely not my place to tell parents how to raise their children. My goal is not to point out parents' flaws, because honestly, I think overprotection is a sign that they really do have an overwhelming amount of love and care for us. So instead, I'm here to encourage parents to be part of the change their children are already creating. Facilitate those lessons with your kids. Recognize that educating them is protecting them. Teachers, you are none other than Mr. Ratburn himself. I know you just love teaching us that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but we really do need to be learning more than that. In science, I want to learn about climate change. In history, I want to learn how past injustices have shaped modern-day inequalities. Applying our content past the pages of our textbooks and out into the world is essential if we ever want to be able to say that overprotection is truly over. In the end, overprotection comes down to realizing one thing. Safe doesn't mean hiding us from these issues and pretending we'll never face them. Safe means we're educated and prepared to take on these challenges when they're already right in front of us. I am so beyond proud to be part of a generation that treats this world like we don't have a backup, because we don't. Adults, you have the power to stop overprotecting and start introducing us to the sometimes scary but very real issues that we need to know. Because as today's youth and tomorrow's leaders, we deserve to know the truth. Thank you.